Welcome. Thank you so much, Jane, for organising this. I've been really looking forward to it. And I think it's great that we're recording it because I know that people do like to watch things back. And it's also good for us as well, so that we can have a record of our discussions. My name's Thangam Debbonaire, and I'm chair of Labour Women's Network. I'm also, in a surprise to pretty much everyone in my life, a member of the House of Lords. And I also do various other things, mostly to do with arts and culture and some business advice. And being a chair of Labour Women's Network is a great joy for me. First of all, because it meant I won an election last year, but second of all, because on the screen in front of me, I can see some great LWN sisters, and some of you who maybe didn't have that fortune, but have said you would like to at some point. But you are this evening in an LWN space, and that's one of the things that for a lot of us made us the politicians we are. And I couldn't take the LWN bit out of my life. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce our panel, but only by name because I think they are really good at doing what in LWN we encourage all women to do who are taking up political office, which is to use your voice and take up your space. But I also encourage everyone on screen to use the voice of the chat. This isn't one of those meetings where you're not allowed to put chat in the chat. Though obviously be respectful if there's something really, really tense going on screen. I hope not, but if it just be aware of that. But I think the chat's really useful. It helps me as chair just to keep an eye on if there are people who've got questions or points. Jane and Sian are very good at spotting who might be waving their hand at me that I haven't noticed, but I will do my best to keep an eye on you. This evening is about, in many ways, the only constitutional requirement of any government, which is, I mean, one of you, Louise, Alex, and Sophie might be able to tell me if I get the wording wrong, but it is the safety and security of the citizens and of the realm. There's literally no other constitutional requirement. And I've had to say that to quite a few people recently who've found that perhaps uncomfortable. I remember avoiding saying that in my previous constituency because I don't know, Judy, who was my organiser, may confirm that this would not have helped me in any way, shape, or form. And yet, people in Bristol work in the armed forces. Some of them work in defence procurement, some of them work in the defence industry, doing good, skilled jobs that are necessary to defend our country. And to help make sure that those of you who take up service, and thank you for that, aren't going in with bows and arrows, as I actually had to say to someone this morning, what do you want to send them in with? So following the general election, the Labour Party, the Labour government, we made defence a key priority. And being a girly swat, I did actually go into the Chamber of the House of Lords, a produced prop. The Strategic Defence Review was the thing that has most recently come out of that. But we also have some really excellent people on the backbenches, on the select committee, and in ministerial posts doing defence, but also on the Intelligence and Security Committee, which is a bicameral cross-party committee that has to be very secret. In fact, some of my friends are on it and they tell me I'm doing the secret thing today, which is I find quite interesting, but that is to hold to account our intelligence and security communities. Things that are relevant perhaps for our discussion today are about challenging a culture of unacceptable and abusive behaviour. My background was in domestic violence and violence against women and girls. This is one of the things I had a particular interest in, was violence against women and girls in the armed forces, and how the culture of trying to challenge that comes up against cultures in the armed forces, but also operational practices that if you are in the armed forces, that's the point of them. So I'd be really interested to hear from our panelists shortly about how you think the Violence Against Women and Girls Task Force is doing or can do to make cultural improvements. Obviously, restaffing, shall I say, after years of cuts, but making sure that we actually have the personnel we need with the skills we need, but with the proper pay recognition and reward structures and the recognition of family life. How we do that for both men and women, recognising family life, whether that be quarters or it be arrangements for leave. And we have, as a Ministry of Defence, set a target for women to account for 30% of all recruits by 2030. I read that and I thought that doesn't sound like enough, but I think that I'm pretty sure that's progress. And so I'd also like to hear from our panelists about how you think that, why you think that matters, how it matters. We've certainly had to make those arguments in LWN for why it matters in politics. I'd really like to hear from our panelists about why that matters and what good looks like in order to get to that target. And there is, of course, an Armed Services Commissioner bill going through Parliament at the moment. I'm pretty sure I voted on that last week. So again, any thoughts that my colleagues might have about what that will do or what the limitations might be and what we as parliamentarians might need to do. So for Emma and Louise in the Commons and for me up the other end, what do we need to be doing to make sure that that Armed Services Commissioner is able to do what they need to do for women? And I think that's as far as I'm going to go. There are other things I could say, but I don't want to take up the time because we've got incredible women on our panel tonight. And we've also got all of you to ask questions or raise points. Some of the women on the panel tonight I've known for quite a while, and some I've just met this evening but knew of by reputation. So Sophy Antrobus. I don't know how to fit all your titles into one title, Sophie, but you just put Sophie. Are you Dr. Insert military title Sophy Antrobus? How do we do that?
Just doctor. I
Just
don't use
doctor.
my military title anymore.
Right. Okay. So thank you. And I always encourage Women in Labour Women's Network, when you get your doctorate, you work hard for it. So I won't refer to you as Dr. Sophie because I've known you for many years. But I just wanted to make sure we all knew that because I'm really proud of you. Sophie and I were key seat candidates in 2015, and that wasn't a great year for Labour. So it was a hard fight. Also, no stranger to hard fights. Alex Fawbert, also a background in the armed forces, and she fought the hard fight last year in Boston and Skegness. And I think that also deserves its own round of applause. I think that Sophie and Alex, we all three of us in the little row at the top here know what it's like to lose and in different circumstances. And it's an incredible service that we perform for the Labour Party and as women and as members of the armed forces. I think there are multiple layers there. So I just wanted to say thank you for coming on this evening. Louise Jones is one that we're incredibly proud to see in Parliament, representing North East Derbyshire. Am I right in thinking that was Natasha Engels' old seat, former Deputy Speaker?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I've been waiting for the person that kicked Natasha out to get kicked out themselves. And I know, given what I just said about losing, it's probably not kind of me, but Natasha was super, and I've heard that you are too. So thank you so much. Louise also had a career in the British Army before. Presumably were you also one who suddenly discovered you had to sort of give up work and go to work in Parliament on a Monday? Did you have that?
No. I'd already left the
No.
military a little while beforehand. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And Emma Lewell-Buck, a dear friend in Parliament, who is the first ever homegrown MP for South Shields. And we were just talking about being homegrown for the place you want to represent, as Alex was standing for her home place as well. Emma and I worked together for the first time, I think, on a children's bill, what feels like a lifetime ago. Do you remember it, Emma? I think Ed Timpson was the minister. And there's now two Timpsons in Parliament because Ed, of course, lost and then came back, and we've got one upstairs who's in our party. So it's really nice to have all four of you on the screen with us. And we've got so much that we could talk about. But I suppose where I'd quite like to start is by asking all four of you, one at a time, initially at least, just to start us off with, why does it matter? We do know that we've had significant reforms for the armed forces in recent years, but we know that there's this ambitious target. In your opinion, why does that matter and how do we get there? And I'm going to start with Alex. I'm just going to go for it, Alex. If you could unmute, and if you want to tell us a bit more about you, you take up your space and use your voice, please. Space bar, is it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Got it.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for allowing me to come on and occupy my space this evening. My name is Alex Fawbert. I'm a military veteran. I have made a few notes about something that I'd like to start with, if that's okay, as an
Go for
opening
it.
gambit in true Labour Women's Network style. I'd like to finish with my 3 points that I'd like to land with you quite securely today. I want to start, though, by paying tribute to the generations, actually, of women who have served their country through varying developing terms of service and over time, because we do indeed stand on the shoulders of many generations of women who have remained largely invisible over time. So a huge thank you to the Labour Women's Network for hosting this event. It's an honour and privilege to be in this space and to be here. For my part, I'm intensely proud to have served and to have been part of women in history and women in the armed forces as the history of that. My service was between 1986 and 1997. So that was quite an interesting time. When I served in the first part of my service, women were not allowed in frontline combat roles. There was still a ban on homosexuality in the military. Women were discharged on pregnancy. And so it was probably a wholly different cultural picture than it is now in many ways. My service record, though, is a good example of a woman who has remained visible in that military space for almost now 40 years. And that's quite unusual, really, because I've been very determined to be present in my space because it was hard earned to actually get to where I got. And it was very hard earned to achieve what I achieved. And I recognise the vital role in visibility and voices in supporting the future generations of women. So my service, just in a nutshell, I did all in all 11 years, 9 years regular, 2 years reservist. My service was split into 2 parts. So I joined as a private soldier at the very, very bottom. It has to be said, I come from a working class background and from a life of poverty. I mean, I often think that I'd really like to go and have a cup of tea with Angela Rayner, because I think that our backgrounds would be, quite similar. And so it was difficult to get on that ladder in the first place for me. But I managed to work my way up that ladder. And then the second half of my service was commissioned, having gone to the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, following some very interesting service with the Intelligence Corps. I spent 2 years as a reservist, as an infantry officer. Now that turned some heads back then. I wore the cap badge of the Staffordshire Regiment, and there was a great deal of huffing and puffing and disapproval at that time. I've served as a Royal Marines Cadets officer. I now serve with the Royal British Legion. I'm in the online space as a military veteran, and that is not a great space to be. And that is a point that I would definitely like to make this evening. And I'm sure that, may come up in conversation. But I have been a visible veteran throughout that time. And so I feel well placed to make my 3 points. So 1, women veterans of all generations really matter. To those who served, back in that kind of era of, the national serviceman kind of era, but all the way through to modern service. Visibility matters because we can influence modern ways. We have our influence now that many of us are in senior positions. Number 2, I say to the Ministry of Defence, I understand the Force for Inclusion report. Lead the way. Don't be distracted from that mission. Do not be dissuaded to water down those inclusion principles, because it is mission critical. I heard a lady once say to me that diversity in the armed forces is a superpower, and it absolutely is. And it will be very easily lost and very hard to win and maintain. So the battle is there for the taking, really. And I'm talking here of my experience of women really struggling, women of colour, women from working class backgrounds like mine, LGBTQ plus women in the forces who have really missed out as a result of that not being pushed. So please let HR, let policy have its maximum impact. And finally, my 3rd point, why does that all matter? Because this is the greatest opportunity we have to lift the nation. The armed forces as an employer could be a vehicle to raise educational standards, tackle violence against women and girls. It could provide opportunity for working class youngsters like me to really develop, grasp that social mobility and really move forward. And in the new sort of technology age that we're in, there will be many, many more opportunities that working class children can get involved with as well. So look, the armed forces was life-changing for me, and I really want that to continue for the future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I can see Sean beaming with pride there. I mean, I love how you put that. And by the way, I think Angie would love to have a cup of tea with you one day, and we'll have to arrange that. She's an LWN girl as well.
I'd love that.
And thank you so much. I'm going to move us across to Sophie. Similar to Alex, if you want to use that as a jumping off point, but Alex got to, why does it matter? Feel free to take it in any order you like, Sophie. Tell us as much or as little about you as you would like.
Thanks, Thangam. And it's really great to be here, and thank you everybody for joining us. I suppose I come at this slightly differently from Alex, which is always a good thing. Oh, by the way, LWN, I'm standing up, one of those lessons. So just wanted to mention that. So I'm a co-director of the Freeman Air and Space Institute at King's College London. I have a PhD, as Thangam kindly mentioned. I work in contemporary air power specifically, really. So things like deterrence, drones, risk appetite in the forces, and currently a lot of stuff on tactical nuclear weapons. Although my PhD was historical. I was in the Air Force for 20 years, and I'm very happy to share my not very great experience of treatment of women in the forces. I joined as the 7th woman pilot in the Air Force in the early 90s and had a pretty rough time of it. And I ended up leaving mainly because I hit, and we might come on to this, barriers. When you hit the one really misogynist boss, it really messes your career up. So I see myself as both insider and outsider. I don't generally identify as a veteran, although I did co-author a paper called Deeply Odd Women Veterans as Critical Feminist Scholars, where me and a fellow ex-naval woman officer shared our weird experiences, which at the time we normalized. We thought they were funny. We thought they were okay. They seemed trivial, but actually when you look back, really quite bad. So partly I'm influencing policy and government in the institute that I'm in. I'm here before the Defence Committee. I was on the Challenge and Review panel for the Strategic Defence Review on the air proposition. Papers I've written have gone forward to MOD, but also I do write very critically at times, and I get myself into a bit of trouble in that. But so I've written about the fallacy of the RAF calling itself a meritocracy, for example, which I think is hilarious, and the straitjacket of professional military education. So I've got this weird identity. It isn't really predominantly as a veteran. I clearly am an insider. I'm partly funded by government funding, and I work closely with the Ministry of Defence. But on the other side, I want to prick holes in what they're doing and criticise. So I just have quite a strange background. But something I will agree with Alex, there's something going on here about, I think in all of our, and Louise will maybe want to come onto this as well. I think my desire to become an MP and stand as a candidate for those 2 torturous years when we weren't doing very well, which I don't regret for a second, and I encourage people to be candidates all the time, is that I came out, particularly of the Iraq War, really, really quite cross with our with Labour, but I wanted to be, metaphorically speaking, inside the tent, and the rest of that phrase. I didn't really want to be outside it. And I suppose because I didn't get that chance to join, to become a member of Parliament, I think a lot of the PhD in what I do now is because I still somehow want to have a say and want to influence, which is what Alex was reflecting on. I think I'll leave it there for now. There's so much to talk about. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Sophie. And I think it's, again, I can see Sean beaming with pride, but also I think one of the things you're doing there, and both you've done this so far, is finding a way to make your voice heard, even if it isn't the way that you might have set out. And that's a really important part of what I think the experience of being a candidate can do for you and I'm glad that it's had some really positives, because we are very fortunate that you are doing policy advice. So thank you. Louise, can I come to you next, please? And you also had a career in the British Army, but you tell us what you want to tell us. And if we're getting to why does it matter? And I'm going to pick that one up in a minute anyway. So if you think of something else previous to, don't worry about it. Louise, over to you.
Yeah, so for those that don't know me, I served in the British Army from 2013 to 2020 in the intelligence corps, which included a tour to Afghanistan. And I think I'm going to jump straight to why it matters. I think there's a point that we need to keep making over and over again, which is that the armed forces need women in it, that they're demonstrably better for having women in it, and that women haven't been they haven't opened all roles to women or any roles to women because somebody out there wanted to be nice to us, was saying, oh, we should be inclusive. Inclusivity is good. It's important. What happened was, because women had proved time and time again on operations that they could do anything and everything that was asked of them, and it no longer became tenable to have a blanket ban on women serving in certain roles. Afghanistan was just the latest in that. When we talk about women being allowed to become pilots, well, they'd already proved their worth when they were transporting Spitfires in World War II, for example. They showed that they could do it. And then obviously Afghanistan was really marked by the sheer number of women who are out on the ground, carrying the same amount of kit, walking side by side with the infantry, facing exactly the same risks, living in exactly the same conditions. And it was no longer tenable or plausible or credible for anybody to say that a woman couldn't be also an infantry soldier doing those kind of roles. And it's interesting because my service coincided with when the last infantry and armoured roles got finally opened up. And, this was quite a big culture change within the British military. And I really have to say that there were some fantastic men in the army who completely led the charge on this. General Patrick Sanders, former head of the army in particular, was fantastic. He, came straight out the traps and said, there's plenty of you men that aren't passing the fitness standards, so don't start complaining when women do pass it and you're not. And that was the kind of tough speaking we needed. So he showed some real leadership there. And it was a really interesting thing to me, because I have been so lucky, and the others have already referred to this, Alex in particular, that all the opportunities that I have had have come about because other women fought really, really, really hard for them. Nobody really raised an eyebrow when I said I was going to stand for Parliament. And that was just not the case for, my Labour predecessor in the constituency at all. And I'm sure she would speak about her own experiences there. But when I was looking around the number of women that we have in Parliament at the moment, I think roughly half, all the women in Parliament now, I think roughly half of all the women there have ever been. And it really wasn't that long ago that it was really unusual to be a woman standing for Parliament, really unusual. And the fact that that was completely normal for me is a massive, massive privilege. The opportunities that I had in the military, again, came on the back of so many others who fought hard. And I actually served with the lady who was the fetus in the case that her mum fought to be allowed to stay in the military when she was pregnant. So, that was quite a tale to have. Whereas now the military has a fantastic maternity package. And again, that all had to be fought for, and very conscious that my generation was very, very lucky for it. And I think we have to remember how far we've come. The opportunities that are, I could have switched across to the infantry or the armoured corps if I'd wanted to later in my career when the opportunities finally came up. Fundamentally, it was a little bit too late for someone like me. But I think it's wonderful when I look at young women. I was just chatting to one just the other day, and she very casually was saying, yeah, I might go infantry, I might go rifles. And it was just wonderful to hear her talking about it like it would have been any other cat badge or anything like that, which is wonderful. Within the culture in the military at all, and I think, again, this is why it's hugely important important and why it matters, because we all know that diverse teams work better. They just do. It's a fact. Diversity of background, of upbringing, and yes, of gender too, means that you will have a better team. And I think, and that's why I think it's interesting when you look at some of these targets for the number of women in the military. I think you're never going to get 50-50 in the military. You know, it's a very, very physical job, and it's very, very demanding. But I think during my service, the number of women as a percentage in the military dropped. Which, you know, part of a period of time where the number of people in the military as a whole was dropping. You know, that's a little bit concerning to me that we were going backwards in that respect. And it means that we'll be a weaker military for it if we're not getting the very best that we can have to come in and work for the military and do the wide range of roles. Particularly now, we are expanding the kind of things you can do in the military with this new cyber roles that you can do direct entry, which is all very different. I'll stop there because I think I just sort of canted through kind of the answer to your first question. But I think for me, yeah, it's about recognizing how far we've come. I'm sure we're going to discuss how much further we have to go, though.
Thank you so much, Louise. I feel like we're getting a real sense of different perspectives and different experiences, but also acknowledgement as women MPs we have to do of who's come before us, how they've had to do certain things. And I mean, the number of women MPs, I was horrified when I discovered I was the only 403rd. And Emma, you must be in the 200s, are you?
I think so, yeah. I'm pretty
Yeah.
low. Yeah,
It's
pretty low number.
It's quite shocking. And the fact that it took a huge jump last year, mostly thanks to Labour Women's Network, and I am going to be really specific about that because most of the increase comes from our party and a good half of that comes from Labour Women's Network. So yay us. We can all be proud of that. And I can hear from what you're saying, Louise, that there's been similar sorts of important things that women have had to go through and suffer, and then there's been progress made, such as Harriet having to be pregnant behind and try and breastfeed behind the Speaker's chair when she was the first pregnant MP. And we're not there anymore. It's still got a long way to go. Emma, I'd like to move on to you, please, because I think having an experienced parliamentarian with such a great perspective on why this matters, but also you've been a great campaigner on particularly issues of poverty, and I've always known you to be someone who's been prepared to speak her mind and be politically savvy about it. So I'd really like to know why you think this is important, and perhaps we can segue a bit either now or later onto what we should as parliamentarians be doing and keeping an eye on.
All right, thank you. I might canter around a bit, so tell me to shut up, Thangam, if I keep on going. A real honour to follow Alex, Sophie and Louise, and thank you so much for asking me to be here tonight. I am also a graduate of Labour Women's Network, and next week I am graduating from the Royal College of Defence Studies as well, which I've been doing since September last year. Prior to getting into Parliament, for those who don't know, I had multiple jobs. I grew up pretty poor, so we always worked in my house. My mum came in one day, I think when I was 13, and said, I've got you a job. And I was like, oh, I'm too young to work. She said, you live here, so you'll work. So my last job, though, before I came into Parliament, I was a child protection social worker. I've been a member of the House of Commons Defence Committee since 2020. And what I find quite surprising, and even now there's more women on the committee, at that stage there was only myself and Sarah Atherton, is that every time we went on a foreign trip anywhere or went to any events, sometimes I was the only woman in the room, sometimes Sarah was. And the one thing people always asked us, they never asked any of the men, was, why are you on this committee? Why are you interested in defence? What are you doing here? And we constantly had to justify it. And I used to say, why should women MPs not care about the safety of our country and the safety of our world? And why should we not want the very best for those people who are keeping us safe, who are serving in our armed forces? And that leads me on to one of the most groundbreaking reports I think our committee ever did was by former MP Sarah Atherton, my friend, where she led on the Protecting Those Who Protect Us report, which looked at women's experiences of the armed forces. Now, that report was produced back in 2021, and the evidence that we heard was shocking and distressing, and some of the accounts that women shared with us of violence, bullying, sexual harassment, and sexual assault and rape is something that will stay with me to this day. And that's why now as a committee, I've ensured that we continue to look at this on a regular basis to make sure that all the recommendations that we made back in 2021 are being tracked and are being implemented, because I feel I really owe it to those women who came forward and shared their trauma with us and how brave they were. And we owe it to them to keep pushing for that change. And it is worth mentioning, though, before I finish, because I'm aware I'm probably rambling now, 90% of women in that report did say to us that they would recommend joining the forces to women and that it was a thoroughly rewarding career. I think it's just when things go wrong for women in the military, they go dramatically wrong with really dire consequences for those who are victims. And I'll leave it there, Thangam, because if you don't stop me, I'll just go on for ages.
Thank you all four so much, because you've given us 4 different but interconnected perspectives. And Emma has already highlighted for me what I wanted us to get onto, which is the role of parliamentary scrutiny. Emma, were you just raising your hand because you wanted to add something, or are you, did I imagine that?
Genuinely IT illiterate. It was a mistake.
Fine. I think the fact that we have it, I am honestly, I don't know why I'm shocked, Emma, that it was just you and Sarah for so much of that time. And I'm really pleased that we've been able to draw things out, but also the stories of women working really, really hard and getting stuck into defence. I'd really like to bring us open to some more discussion points at the moment. We've talked a little bit about why it matters, and I think we've had a really robust defence there from Louise saying diverse teams just make better teams, they just do. I'm happy with that as a level of proof. Emma, have you found you've needed to argue that on the Defence Select Committee? Was there ever an issue about, for instance, doing the investigation that you talked about?
Yeah, there was massive resistance at the outset. We had to actually get permission from the Secretary of State to speak to serving personnel, because that's not something that's normally allowed. There was a lot of resistance. It took a lot of to and fro. It took a lot of fighting, and eventually they caved. And even then, I think when the report came out, I think a lot of people were shocked and horrified at some of the stuff that we'd uncovered. And even to this day, not every single one of our recommendations have been implemented. Most of them have, but some of them still haven't. And for me, some of them around sexual abuse and rape, removing that completely from the military courts and having it completely in civilian courts, is something that still hasn't changed to this day. And it's something that the committee constantly raises with the various ministers we've had over the years.
That's really interesting. And I just wondered if any of the 4 of you would like to comment on how you think things have changed. Sophie, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I do. And sorry to be, I'm going to be a bit critical, but that's part of the conversation, isn't it? By the way, you know, I agree about Sarah's report. I also know Sarah not particularly well, but I've met her a few times. I really admire what she did. I actually contributed to that with written evidence. And I think it's a good report. And we don't need more reports. We just, as you say, Emma, need to put in the recommendations. I just bring one thing up which others might want to comment on, which is the recent High Court ruling against the Secretary of State for Defence on women communicating with the media in the light of their abuse in the services. And because, and this was pre-Labour, but it was Philip Hammond's time, actually, I'm pretty sure, that defence communications really cracked down on and people being able to speak out, public, media, even to their own MP, without permission from the Ministry of Defence. I was really actually disappointed that the Secretary of State fought that. It was a Conservative conceived plan. And I think particularly the right of anybody, women, but anybody, to speak to their MP without the chain of command giving them permission should be a complete given. And yet Labour and the Secretary of State actually fought that. I used to work in media and communications in the MOD. It's the most dysfunctional, culturally weird area ever. It is defensive. It is appalling. It is not the fault of the individuals in there now. It's decades. They're just inculcated. But I just wanted to make that point in because, Emma, I so agree with you about the value of the report. But I am disappointed that Labour thought that, and I wish Labour would be more confident to allow service personnel to have some contact in public or with their MPs.
That's really helpful, Sophie. Emma, did you want to come in back on that?
Yeah, I mean that's I agree with Sophie completely, and I'm just wondering if Sophie or anyone else thinks that when the Armed Forces Commissioner is appointed later this year, if that might be someone who we can put pressure on to help change that situation. I don't know what anyone else thinks.
Louise or Alex, did you want to come in on that? I mean, Louise, you must have had sight of the Armed Forces Commissioner bill, and Alex, you may know about it. Louise, you unmuted then.
Yeah, so I just want to echo what everyone's already said about the Atherton report. You know, that was an immense piece of work, and it's frustrating that she wasn't Veterans Minister, but we can talk about that one another time, I'm sure. And I think, yeah, from my perspective, I have a lot of questions about the military justice system and rape and sexual abuse. I think, the stats speak for themselves, and for what is quite a specialist case, do we have the right experience and training in dealing with those sorts of issues? And I think that's a really important point. The Armed Forces Commissioner, I think, is going to be a huge, massive thing. When at the root of a lot of issues, when it comes down to issues with the military, often at the root of all of this is the chain of command, and it's obviously an incredibly vital thing. But where the issue is with the chain of command, or where the chain of command on assisting in solving a problem, then it's incredibly different for somebody to feel like they're making headway with their particular issue. And that has that causes a lot of other problems. Number one, it can cause issues to spread horizontally across a unit. Higher ups that would perhaps want to do something differently about the issue will never find out about it. You end up with all kinds of secondary issues being caused. You end up with lots of conflict of interest. That the great thing about being in an army unit, or any military unit, is the really close bond that you get with everybody that you work with. It's probably slightly different now to maybe what it would have been prior to the internet and so on and so forth. But you are living with these people, working with these people, deploying with these people. And when you end up with these tight bonds, where you end up with bullying, harassment, sexual abuse, these kind of issues, the chain of command system really struggles, I think, to deal with it effectively and comprehensively. An Armed Forces Commissioner really strengthens the ability to go outside of that, and also, I think, to help identify what might initially seem unconnected issues that are popping up. Who really is doing that holistic view across defence when you see things that are popping up with unacceptable behaviours towards women. Who really is kind of identifying where there's trends, where there's patterns, where there's links that we should be doing things about it. I mean, I'm sure others might agree with me that there were certainly some camps that felt very different as a woman when you walked onto them or stayed on them, as opposed to others. It's these kind of wider environmental issues where you need somebody who isn't the CO that you can go to. So I think the Armed Forces Commissioner is going to be a huge step forward, and it wouldn't surprise me if something that landed on their desk was very much how we can make the military a more supportive place for those women who end up as the victim of the full range of violence and abuse.
Thank you, Louise. Alex, I noticed you unmuted. Do you want to pick that up? And also, Louise, you raised some issues there about leadership and hierarchy, which I want us to come on to in a minute. But Alex, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, please, if I could. I do see things, I suppose, from a slightly different perspective, in that my service straddled two completely different eras. And I just want to give a big shout out for, my cap badge, which was the Women's Royal Army Corps. So this was pre 1992. The Women's Royal Army Corps, there was real solidarity. There was a real sisterhood. It never felt that you were alone necessarily, because there was always the WRAC HQ or the WRAC fellow officer or the WRAC colleague who you could pick up the phone to. That network, that solidarity network, was always there, regardless of where you were posted to. And the Women's Royal Army Corps Association, I'm still a member of that association. It's still phenomenally successful. It was quite an inclusive team of people as well. Now, bearing in mind, it was quite glamorous. Am I allowed to say that as well? It was glamorous. It was a wonderful, like a real true sisterhood, not too dissimilar to the LWN. There are definite similarities between the bond that you got between those women who wore that same cap badge. It is a family thing. That cap badge, that identity is, definitely a family thing. I was slightly different in that I was part of the intelligence corps. A quick funny story, actually. I've done quite a lot of campaigning with Louise and for Louise. I've knocked on plenty of doors to get Louise elected. And we were just walking along the street one day, and Louise said, "Oh, so where are you from?" "Oh, I'm from Chesterfield." "What do you do?" "I used to be in the army." And I was like, "So was I. How weird." "What regiment you in?" "Actually, I was in the intelligence corps." "So was I." Wow, that's really, but that, and since then, really, it's like a bond, and that will always stay. Now, I don't know how that felt for people post the disbandment of the WRAC, which was quite a sad day for me. When that unit closed down, we literally sold off the silver by auction, raised a lot of money. Victoria Wood came to play at our farewell. It was it was almost like a real end of an era, and I was lucky enough to be there. But can I just give you the alternative? Because my key word on this is inconsistent. So for all of those positives, for all of that sisterhood, for all of that solidarity, my experiences were very inconsistent. So remember, I served in that era where there was sisterhood in the background, but where women who were LGBTQ were pursued ruthlessly. They were searched, they were physically searched, they were strip searched, their rooms were trashed. Looking for what? I do not know. But it was truly an era of hatred against women who people suspected of being gay at that time. They lost everything. They lost their careers, they lost their pensions, they lost their futures. I'm so glad to see the Etherton report putting that right. But for those of us who were allies, we didn't have it easy either, So I was a very sort of, strong ally of the community. We were called lumpy jumpers, dykes, racks. We were physically assaulted. We were pursued for sex relentlessly, propositioned relentlessly. Do you know what? It was lonely. It was very easy to be isolated, especially as the only woman in a regiment. So, that inconsistency on that, you really didn't know what that was going to feel like when you were posted to a new unit. A unit could be very supportive. So when I served with the intelligence corps, I was respected massively. I was almost revered, like, she's busy on operational stuff, really, tricky sort of operational business. So, don't go anywhere near her, don't get involved. But then when I wasn't with the intelligence corps, then I really did reap the whirlwind, to be fair. Lots of abuse, lots of violence, lots of harassment, lots of physical touching. These are real experiences, particularly perhaps for women who are served at a time of those historic terms of service. Things might be different now, but for those veterans of my era and my age, not only do we live with those memories and those kind of experiences, which kind of, didn't matter at the time, particularly, not always, nobody listened, and certainly it wasn't put right. But we still spend time with those men in other spaces as veterans online. They're still here, is what I'm trying to say. So, I still, on the online space, come across, some very similar experiences, and that's a real shame.
Thank you, Alex. And I'm just noticing some really thoughtful and sad and painful memories coming up, and people sharing in the chat as well. And Val, thank you for contributing. And I feel so conflicted about this because I think there's so many parallels with experience of abuse in other professions and other settings. However, you women were serving our country and you were putting your lives on the line, and it feels like a double betrayal to hear about that. I wonder if we could spend maybe the final sort of 20 minutes or so thinking, and maybe bringing some of the other women on the call into this if you feel able to, thinking about what good could look like. Let's say 2030 is that world in which women are not experiencing what you're saying, but also where their leadership skills and their skills, their specialist skills, their technical skills, their operational skills, their teamwork skills are really valued and experienced and allowed to develop so that they can play their full part in the defence of our country. And I just wondered if you could have a think about what are the barriers we need to remove? What are the skills and qualities that we need to champion and support other women with? What needs to happen? What needs to happen in the political sphere as well? Because, you know, Emma and Louise have both raised some of the things that might happen there. Sophie with policy advice and quite rightly challenging the Labour government to be better and then more better and even better. What needs to happen to get us to 2030 where we're having a completely different conversation? Who would like to start us off? And please feel free, women in the chat or on the screen, if you do want to alert me, to contribute. You're all looking very thoughtful there. Sophie, you are muted. Go for it.
Okay, so a real challenge looking at 2030, I think, is the next generation joining the forces. And this is not me sort of, I don't know, giving you anything anecdotal, but if any of you have ever come across Professor Rosie Campbell, who did a lot of work on politics and women candidates 2015, 17, 19, has been until recently heading up the Global Institute for Women's Leadership. Her research that came out last year showing that there's an increasing a divide between young men and young women in terms of them being supportive of gender equality, I think is a massive challenge for the forces with these targets. And I haven't heard many senior military people or in politicians in the defence space, but I may have missed it, speaking about, oh my goodness, we might be going backwards with the intake. And how are we going to address it, keep on top of it, keep discussing it? So that's one thing. And the second thing, this is specific to, well, it's not, but with the RAF, many of you will be aware that there was this problem over positive discrimination, which is unlawful, over recruiting in the RAF. And that has had a really significant effect, both on women and ethnic minority members of the Royal Air Force, who now are seen as people who got there because they're minorities. And to Alex's point about people still being there on the online space, my goodness, since that happened, senior serving people, not massively senior, I'm talking sort of colonel equivalent, felt more free to go, oh, I always knew, you know, I was been discriminated against because I'm just a white old man. So I think there's quite a lot of barriers, and some of them are getting worse rather than better. And sorry, that's depressing, but I'm just going to put that out there.
No, I think that's important because that research, and yeah, I've seen Rosie's research. I think it cuts across a lot of professions where we have made progress, and then can so easily slip back if we don't, sadly, have to keep getting up every day, chipping away at the patriarchy. When will that day come, sisters, when the mountain of patriarchy is just gravel or maybe sand? We can turn it into cement or something. Emma, you've unmuted. Does that mean you have a thought you wish to share?
Just a few quick comments, really. Just it wasn't lost on me that our last look at the Women in the Armed Forces recommendations was only in March this year, and our panel was 5 people and 4 of them were men. One of them who has since had to have their service terminated because of inappropriate behaviour with the junior female officer. So, and I think the thing is that people, for me, I've never served. So still for a lot of us who've never actually served, the military is shrouded in a lot of mystery. And there's a lot of people who are serving who feel still unable to speak out and talk about things in an honest and open way because of those hierarchies and because, you know, they have a separate justice system and all the rest of it. So I suppose it's incumbent on MPs like myself to keep raising those concerns, and and my colleagues on the committee to say, yes, do speak out, do talk to us, do let us know what we need to change, because if we don't know, we can't make those changes. And I just think things like there's a move, isn't there, towards zigzag careers for people who are experts in cyber and tech and cyber and other fields like that, to kind of zigzag in and out of the military and between the civilian world. And I think things like that can only help to kind of open it up a bit more and make it feel less like this separate institution where it's got all its hierarchies and layers, and more like kind of, I don't know, I think you get the point I'm trying to make. So it's been a long day, Thangam. I'm getting my words mixed up. But I think you get my point.
Yes, we did. We all knew what you meant. Thank you, Emma. That's it's yeah, I think there's no point us being pointlessly hopeful if we don't temper some of that with what we know about reality. And I hesitate to use comparisons. So I think your zigzag thing is really helpful, Emma. But the reason I hesitate is I come back to what I said before, is you guys serve. And that's not the same. There is a whole layer on top of things that women have to do in other public service roles. Alex or Louise, did you want to add something? And I'm just noticing, Val, I don't know if you wanted to speak, or is it okay with you if I read some of this out? It's okay if you don't want to say it, but I think people can see in the chat, Val, who has contributed about the dinosaurs that need to die out of the military. Are you saying yes, okay, you'd be happy to speak, Val? Because if you would, you don't have to take your camera on, but if you want to unmute, it'd be great to hear from you.
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Great. The floor is yours.
No, I've loved this tonight. Hi, Alex. Really, I mean, Alex is my sort of vintage, so totally understand that. And Sian is one of my colleagues in the Hull North CLP. So nice to see you, Sian. Yeah, I did 20 years in the military, 85 to 2005, and I had the same experiences as Alex, to be honest. Just terrible, constantly fighting, constantly having to prove yourself, constantly watching, that there wasn't a hand going up your skirt, twanging your blooming underwear. I've had an attempted rape, which was horrendous. Photographs taken under a door of a toilet, and my vagina being put all over the camp, on photograph boards, on notice boards. Absolutely dreadful. But, it made you the woman that you are, because you just constantly want to fight it and just to get through and prove who you are and have a successful career, and really, absolutely, as some of the ladies have said, to pave the way for the other girls, because my mother was a military woman in the 50s, which was unusual, really unusual. She was a nurse in Libya, Benghazi and Malta, Queen Alexandra's Royal Army Nursing Corps. And she said to me, go out there and experience the world. So I did, and it was terribly challenging. And it's absolutely right that they are still around today, still alive and kicking. I am currently a standard bearer for the Royal British Legion in my area, and I get called sweetheart, darling. Oh, you turned up then, love. The guys get all the invites to all the rugby do's and the football do's. Oh, you won't be available, will you? You'll be babysitting or doing something else. This is the sort of thing that goes on a daily basis. And I'll tell you now, I am exhausted with it. I'm exhausted, because all you wanted to do was be a soldier. That's all I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a man. I just wanted to be a female soldier. And that is, what I aspired to. And I feel that I achieved that. And this ongoing fight, it does need changing. And, Thangam, that is a wonderful question, saying, what does 2030 look like? And I want young girls to go out there and experience the joys of travel and expanding their horizons, and not seeing that their small town is the end of it, because the military offers so much. And what Alex said actually was quite powerful, that you could, we can get the education, we can get the travel, we can get the confidence, we can stop the violence against women and girls if we empower young women. And you can only do that with, advertising, exposure. And I do believe in the positive discrimination, because as I put in the chat, I witnessed it in Australia. My husband's a police officer. I met him when I was in Cyprus in the United Nations. And he was the first one who said to me, what these guys are doing to you, it's unacceptable. And I thought, blimey, you know, he's right. And that was 25 years ago. And he said there'd just been a sort of programme started with the Australian Federal Police women to do exactly, you know, what we've just discussed, you know, recruiting them, putting them into positions. And painful 20 years. I mean, they've been called all sorts, you know, I've heard some awful things. But now it's kind of all right. It's kind of cool with that. They've got commanders out there and people don't really comment on it anymore. It's just accepted. So maybe that's the way forward, and positive sort of advertising and recruiting and opportunities sort of put out there. So yeah, that's my 2 pence. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Val, and thank you for your service, and thank you so much for everything you just said there. That's it. I mean, I feel really inspired and awe-inspired by you and what you've said, because you wanted to be a soldier, and that is a good thing to want to be. And I'm proud that you are also part of this group and this discussion. Judy, you've got your virtual hand up, which shows a level of technological competence that's still beyond me 5 years into the era of Zoom. Can you unmute as well as putting your hand up?
Question.
Go for
Look,
it.
I've done it. Mind
You've
you,
done
I
it.
have lost the big screen. Oh, hang on a minute. Let's get the big screen back so I can see you all. Yeah, I mean, I grew up. This is going to be a bit rambly, but I will get to a point at some point. I grew up in the army. My dad was in the army. My mum was an army wife, and the behaviour and the attitudes towards army wives and army kids was also awful. And my dad was our judo instructor, and there was another judo instructor everybody really looked up to. And I wasn't allowed to go to judo because I was a girl. And my dad asked the other judo instructor, who was senior, could she come and join us in the juniors group? And I was told by this other judo instructor that I could. I mean, I am quite old now, you know, and at this point I was probably 9 or 10, and I was told that I could, but if I cried, then I would have to leave. And it was made very clear to me that if the boys cried, that was all right, but if I cried, I would have to leave. And I had a friend at school, and I persuaded her to come as well. And she was told the same thing, and she was absolutely horrified because she said to me, does that mean that if I cry, you have to leave? That doesn't feel fair. So that's my sort of memory, really, from a very young age of the army, and the inequality. In my later, in my professional life, I worked as an occupational therapist in the NHS, and then I worked for Unison, and I used to represent the civilian workers, most of whom were women, in the police force, the fire service, and the ambulance service. And they have experienced, to a lesser extent, very, very similar issues to women in the forces. And getting their voices heard has been equally challenging. And I think the biggest challenge for women in the army is that the army governs itself. It's not part of the real world. I mean, in a way, it's too much part of the real world, but in another way, it's not part of the real world. And I think overcoming that and bringing in some of the learning around other uniformed organisations, because they're all the bloody same, it's just a question of degree, is possibly a way forward. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. And that's a really useful parallel with the other uniformed services, and that same sense of public service and putting your lives on the line. It is different, but there are similarities. So I think there's some scope for learning between organisations. Faith, you've got your hand up, and I'm also aware that now the screen's moved around, and I think it was I said to Louise and Alex if you wanted to come back on anything, but really this is a time, and Anne Miller McCaffrey, you've put some stuff in the chat, and I wasn't sure if you wanted to add that, but if you don't want to speak, Anne has put some things in the chat. Faith, do you want to unmute so we can hear from you as well?
Okay. Yeah. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Yeah. The discussion today is very good. So what I just want to chip in is our women, where I got I'm not an army or any kind, but I am an officer in just like in a Salvation Army church. So we call us Salvation Army Church. I'm an officer there. But I have a child who is in RAF, who have served in RAF. So my that is a male child, not a girl this time. So what I'm just want to chip in is that our women, we are trying, we are doing absolutely well in the Army, RAF, and Navy. So my own concern is I know we all are speaking about women and inequality in everywhere. I just we should not forget that even though we are fighting for the rights of women and then speaking for them, for their voice to be heard, so sometimes we should always try to make it like looking at it in a bigger picture, and when any allegation of such come up, especially when it's like a kind of it's not maybe anything like a rape or that, maybe others that you say you touched me and you touched me, I didn't touch you, you touched me, I didn't touch you. And when something like that is happening, so we should always try to look at it very well, investigate it very, very well, because some of them are taking an advantage, some of our women out there taking an advantage of because of a man. We are fighting for them. We are men. We are talking about women, girls everywhere, and then when they are taking advantage of that, they're going out there trying to spoil the reputation of women. So what I'm trying to say in essence is that even while we are now saying, oh, we women and everywhere we are being neglected or we are being abused, we are not having the same right as men, we should not forget again to always be careful looking at the whole thing and balancing it, and then the way those accusations goes on, because some of us women, we use it like an opportunist. So yeah, using this as an opportunist, point to pay allegation, especially men in color, especially when they say something like this, the women want to take an advantage of that, because if I say it, they will believe me because I'm a woman. I'm a woman, I'm a girl, I'm that. So you want to do that. Some men have killed themselves, have taken their life because of what they did not do, and then they couldn't believe them. They don't believe them because they say, I didn't do this. And then you keep on, because it's a girl, it's a woman, and women are there fighting for them. Those things, we should go into proper investigation and not using because we are women and believing them. They should remember that the men are still human beings.
I agree, and I think we have some really complex issues there about how we do investigations. That isn't easy, and it's not easy for women to come forward either. So I think we can hold both those things in our heads at the same time, because it must be devastating if you've been accused and you're not responsible for something. I'm very aware that we're getting to time. I think the issue that Alex has just raised is that there are a lot of women who don't get believed and don't report because they know that they won't be believed. So I think we can hold both those thoughts in our heads at the same time.
Yeah.
I would like us to think about coming to a close shortly. So I'm going to ask our 4 panelists, because I don't see any other virtual or text hands up. And Sean's giving me the shake of head. So I'm going to take it an opportunity to say to Sophie, Louise, Alex and Emma, would you like to give us a final thought? If you have one, maybe a final reflection. It can be on how far we've come or something that's come up during the discussion, or what you want us to take away from this as a group of Labour Women's Network sisters, or as parliamentarians, or as policymakers, or as campaigners. And maybe I'll go in reverse order with Emma. Let's start with Emma Lewell.
I think just for any of you out there who know people who are serving and they have issues that they want to raise, to let them know that they have a friend in me, they have friends on the committee. Please do come and talk to us. We're trying our best to move the dial for you.
Thank you, Emma. I really appreciate that. Louise.
I think it's great, and we can celebrate how far women in defence have come, and the enormous contribution that women have made. I think we should take a great deal of heart from that, and how positive the journey that I know that we're all on. And I think this call has been really fantastic in just showing the power of the sisterhood coming together. And just, reflection on Labour Women's Network. I wouldn't be an MP now if not for Labour Women's Network. I didn't get to do the weekend yet anyway, but nonetheless, still very, very important to me. And so I would say to every woman that's still playing a role, let's keep going.
Thank you, Louise. And Sophie?
Totally echo Louise on the LWN, and thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. One kind of slightly odd, but I'm just going to tell you about it. I've put in the chat the paper that I co-authored with my friend Hannah West. She's now at something called, and you probably haven't heard of it, the Centre of Excellence. It's a long name. Centre of Excellence for Equity in Uniformed Public Services. It's a research organisation, Anglia Ruskin, COPS for short, but Excellence and Equity. But it's the paramedics, firefighters. Oh my goodness, I could tell you. Oh, no, I can't tell you probably because we're recording this. An incredible story. I'll tell if any of you want to reach out to me. I'll tell you later about something about the firefighters and how they view some diversity stuff. But I recommend that organisation maybe to have a look at or engage with. And secondly, and this is mainly for, I guess, Emma and a bit Louise, but from your Defence Committee head, Emma, one issue that I'm aware of is that we're a NATO first now strategic defence review. NATO, in terms of their general staffing, that staff the headquarters and so on and so forth, do have diversity champions and policies. But individual nations, it's up to them. And the gender balance is absolutely appalling in NATO postings. It's to do with historic things, people being there a long time, the cost of putting families in those postings. But it may be something that you want to ask about, because it's going to be up to individual nations to improve that diversity. And it's a particular problem. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Sophie. And Alex?
Yes, absolutely. I just want to give a big shout out to the colossal work that's actually being done now, sort of post 2018, post 2019, into women in the military and women veterans in particular. So a big shout out for the Female Veterans Transformation Programme. And there are many other groups as well who are, pulling out all the stops to actually hear women and make women visible. And so I think there's an awful lot of excellent work going on. But I just want to make one point, and I'm hoping Emma will and Louise might grasp this one. When we say women in defence, there are a significant number of us that are not necessarily just in serving roles. So when I think of women in defence, I think of women who are in serving roles, who are in reservist roles. I think of women who are in the cadet forces. Cadet forces could do with extra investment into those complaints procedures and things. They're voluntary organisations. They don't necessarily have the support. So they may feel a bit lonely at times. I come across quite a few lonely women in cadet forces. Also, women who are veterans like me, women who are in the Legion, the British Legion. I think Val mentioned that she may be a standard bearer. There are lots of women who serve in those ways as well. And also women in the online space. I did say I would revisit that. That is a tough and a very lonely place. As a politician online, well, as a woman politician and a veteran online, that's doubly tough, and I think Louise would certainly echo that. I do jump to her defense, whenever I can online, because it's very, very challenging indeed. So, that women in defense isn't just serving, it's a huge kind of range, and that's without even starting on military families and children too. So, it's a huge thing. And military children in cadet forces, they are there from the age of 10. So, just be mindful of the breadth and the range of women who are connected to the military family. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I can't tell you what an inspiring discussion this has been, and challenging and difficult and some hard stuff. But I also want to end on a Labour Women's Network note. I hope you're all members of Labour Women's Network. You might not be, and you might think you are, because you don't automatically become a member of Labour Women's Network when you join the Labour Party and you're a woman. You do have to join in separately, because we are a separate legal entity affiliated to the Labour Party but not part of its structures. If you are all members, that is brilliant. If you could please try and encourage other women in your constituency Labour parties who are members of the Labour Party and female. Those are the only two things we ask. And we would really like to have more members. That means we can train more women for more positions of leadership, and not just MPs, but women in the Senate elections next year, women in the elections in Scotland, women in local government, mayoralty posts. And I've probably missed one, Sean, but we help train women. Sean's our training lead, and obviously loads of women, big fans of Sean, and loads of you clearly had some of her training. I was before Sean's time. If your membership has expired recently, please, I'm glad you feel inspired to check and rejoin. It would be brilliant. Jane has kindly put the email address for Labour Women's Network in the chat. That's contact@lwn.org.uk. Please do. And as an added sweetener, join now. I believe we're just before the cut-off date, are we, Jane, for voting in the elections, or have we missed it? No, too late. You can vote next year. But anyway, join, because we would like you to, and it is a great sisterhood, and we're here across all shades of red and pink. Our main criteria is that you're Labour and you're a sister. In fact, that's it. Thank you all so much. Thank you particularly to Jane and Sean. You put on such brilliant events, and Jane, your thoughtfulness in putting this one together is really quite something. I'm really proud of the staff team. As chair, it's a joy being chair, because we have such a brilliant team. Thank you all so much, sisters. See you again soon, I hope. The chat's there if you just want to click on anything. Thank you all to our panelists. You've been absolutely wonderful. See you all soon.
Thank you.
Good night, sisters.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.